Today, I'll be commenting on Neville Goddard's 1967 lecture, Test Yourselves. And while I do, I decided to check out a new vegetarian restaurant in the Fuji Mountain area. I am an equal opportunity food enjoyer, whether it is meat or vegetarian. Let us begin. Neville says, "You are urged to examine yourself to see whether you are holding to the faith. Are you accepting as facts the headlines you see in the paper, the telephone call you just received, the morning's mail, or the news on TV which suggests unlovely, horrible things to you? A friend calls and pouring out all the bilge in the world tells you how bad things are and how they are destined to get worse. As you listen, their woes enter and are assumed by you. Now, if you understand this law that imagining creates reality, you should, like a computer, choose what you are going to allow to enter. And when the conversation is finished and your friend's voice is still fresh and clear in your ear, hear her changed words and changed tone of her voice and feel the joy emitted there." So what Neville is saying here is, are you holding to the faith? And what he means by this is, you may read or hear these words of these great mystical truths, but when you go back to what you call the real world, do you apply what you've learned? Or are you still reacting to all that goes on around you? Are you still hearing or seeing or reading of bad news, but doing nothing about it? Because as you read it, and especially if you feel anger or fear, you are on the road to manifesting it, perpetuating it. Instead, you should hear what you want instead. Always make this a habit. Until you make it a habit, you're going to have to remind yourself, but this is exactly what that is, a reminder. Hold to the faith that the mystics are teaching you. Now, one way to do this, Neville shares the testimonials from one of his students, one of his intense students. She has a telephone technique that never fails her. Some of you may have heard this lady before, but repetition is a great teacher to help you make this a habit, or find what works best for you. In one of the testimonials, she tells the story of how one of her friends wanted to be a court reporter and had to take an examination she was sure she would fail. So she would constantly call Neville's student and tell her of her worries and fears. But instead, Neville's student heard her tell her that she passed the test with flying colors. And her friend did indeed take the test. And in an interval of 6 weeks, even though her friend remained negative the whole time, Neville's student continued to believe that her friend passed. Then one day, she called saying, "Do you remember when I took the test?" And I replied, "Yes, and you passed." Then she said, "Yes, but aren't you surprised?" I've been trying to tell her that imagining creates reality, but she cannot understand how an imaginal act unseen by the human senses can be held onto and produce results. But I know it always does. And Neville's student said she has dozens of such stories. And she shared another story. A friend of hers who was in her 50s wanted to change jobs for financial reasons, and she returned to the electronic plant where she had formerly worked, but she felt she would not be accepted because of her age. So Neville's student ignored all these negative thoughts her friend had, and she simply heard her friend in an excited voice tell her she had the job. 1 week later, she called saying, "They not only gave me the job with a large salary increase, but I am receiving credit for the 10 years I worked there before, which will be added to my retirement." A Neville student shares a final testimonial. She had a friend who had a maid who wanted to lose 25 pounds. The doctor had actually told her she needed to lose this 25 pounds, so this would bring her down to 140 pounds. And she had told a Neville student she had tried so many ways to lose this weight, but she couldn't even lose a pound. Neville's student ignored all these comments and disregarded that she had made so many failed attempts. She simply heard that her friend's maid had reached her goal, and then she had to go off for a couple of months, but when she returned again, the maid called saying, "I've been trying to contact you to tell you that I have lost the weight. I couldn't find you when I weighed 140, but now I weigh 139. And what we see in this testimonial that Neville has shared from his student is learning to revise everything unlovely you hear. Now, I'm not saying you have to do it with every little thing, but when something stands out, whether it's for yourself or for another, definitely make sure to practice this law of imagining, to refine this skill, to build successes, thus conviction, and finally mastery, that you'll be living the life you want to be living and come to know who you are. So whatever it is that you or another may be feeling, even if you feel there's just no way for something better, take it to imagination and persist there. Hear the good news you want to hear. If you're more someone who's literary, then write the news you want to be reading. Whatever does it for you. and do this regularly so it can take hold. In closing, Neville says, if someone wants to wallow in self-pity, let him. You are not asked to test the man, but to test yourself. You are not asked to prove it to another, just yourself. See the world as nothing more than yourself pushed out and everything in it, as aiding the birth of your imagination, for the behavior of the world relative to you determined by the concept you hold of yourself. It doesn't really matter what your individual personal life is. The whole vast world is yourself pushed out, and everyone in it is there to aid the birth of all your imaginal acts. Regardless of whether it takes 1 or 100,000, everyone will play his part, and you don't have to ask his permission, for your world is animated by your own wonderful human imagination. So if everything from outside is a reflection of the inside, then in the end, leave the outside world to itself and tend to the inner world, which will influence and create the outer world. It may be hard to understand because it feels like the outer world is so real and separate. But take your night dream for an example. That feels so real when you're in the midst of the night dream. But you wake up and you find it was just a dream. All has dissolved back into you. It was all a reflection of your consciousness of the different things that made impressions. So go right to the source and to the most important question. What do you want? What would it feel like to have what you want? What is a scene that would happen if you had what you want? Maybe someone would be congratulating you or you would be giving thanks. And now, let us close our eyes to the outer world. And after this period of silence, when we return back to the outer world, let us be more mindful what we give our attention, feelings, reactions to. And if we find we are surrounded by something we don't want to perpetuate or that we want changed, may we tune in and read that change, although it's already printed fact. Or tune in and hear the familiar voice and hear them say with excitement, but whatever is more desirable is already so. And now, let us go into the silence. Good.